It is said that somewhere between Dashur and the edge of the Fayum Depression, there lies a stretch of desert that never keeps the same shape twice. The wind moves like memory there, restless, faithful only to silence. Travelers have long avoided that place, not for danger, but for the feeling that it remembers too much. The Bedouins call it Sahet el-Dakira, the plain of remembrance, and beneath that plain, it is whispered, lies a door. No monument marks it, no inscription calls a name. It does not rise proudly like the pyramids, nor sprawl like the temples of Luxor. It rests beneath the dunes, level with the sand, carved into bedrock so old that even the pharaohs called it ancient. The few who spoke of it said the doorway bore no royal cartouche, only a single glyph repeated in a circle, Ankh within a spiral. The door that remembers, said the villagers, lowering their voices. The one Egypt itself forgot. When the 1920s brought the fever of excavation, men with lanterns and notebooks crossed that desert with dreams of discovery. Among them was Dr. William Cartwright, a quiet English archaeologist whose journals, later found half-buried in a crate in Luxor, tell of a site unrecorded by any survey, yet unmistakably older than the necropolis of Saqqara. His expedition had followed the dry bed of a forgotten wadi, guided by local nomads who spoke of hollow sounds beneath their camels' hooves. On the 12th night, the sandstorm that had chased them for days fell still. By dawn, the desert looked rearranged. Dunes rippled like the surface of a sleeping sea. And there, where the wind had carved a shallow basin, the team uncovered the faint edge of a lintel, a perfect rectangle cut into the earth, rimmed with sandstone polished smooth as glass. Cartwright's men brushed away the sand with their bare hands, whispering as if afraid to wake something. The opening revealed stairs descending at a perfect right angle. Each step was etched with constellations: Orion, Sirius, the curve of the Nile traced in stars. The cartography of the heavens, Cartwright wrote, as if one might step not downward, but upward through the dark. They lit their acetylene lamps and began to descend. The air was cool and dry, thick with the scent of mineral dust. On the walls, paintings bloomed out of shadow, not of gods, but of doors within doors, thresholds marked with figures whose faces had been deliberately erased. No pharaoh's name, no royal boast, only a repeated phrase: those who remember are remembered. Deeper still, they found corridors lined with basalt pillars carved in relief. The style was unlike any dynasty, neither Old Kingdom realism nor New Kingdom flourish. The lines were simpler, heavier, as if shaped by tools of an age before art became religion. Some pillars bore faint traces of obsidian inlay, volcanic glass, not native to the region, perhaps carried from the Red Sea mountains or beyond. When the first divers descended, they found a staircase leading downward into what had once been a hypostyle hall. Algae covered everything, turning carvings into living ghosts. Fish swam through doorways once sealed to human eyes. And there, beneath layers of silt, they uncovered the lintel of a doorway carved with strange precision. Two crocodiles facing each other, their tails coiling into a single spiral. Between them, a disk marked with the sun's rays plunging downward, the descent of light into water. Professor Taher wrote in his field journal, "It is the first temple I have seen that seems to have been built for darkness. The deeper chambers were impossible to explore then. The silt was too thick, visibility too faint. The divers returned with sketches, measurements, and a few fragments. A piece of relief showing a priest with a water jar, and a small bronze statuette of Sobek whose eyes had been replaced with pearls. The find was catalogued quietly, overshadowed by the relocation of Abu Simbel and the greater monuments saved from the dam's flood. The sleeping temple slipped back into obscurity, just as it had beneath the river itself. But stories have a way of resurfacing. In 1998, an Italian-Egyptian team revisited the site with sonar mapping. The images revealed something astonishing. Not a ruin scattered by erosion, but a nearly intact structure sealed beneath the mud. The main hall was oval, not rectangular, oriented not to the cardinal points like all known temples, but to the moons rising over the Nile. Around it, concentric corridors echoed the pattern of waves. It was a temple built like water itself, flowing, circling, remembering. Legends tell that priests of Sobek once walked these halls barefoot, carrying lamps of blue oil to light the underwater altars. They chanted hymns not to ascend, but to descend, to mirror the soul's journey into stillness. One hymn, preserved in a later Coptic manuscript, whispers, "Let the river be the breath, let the current be the prayer. We return not upward, but inward." And then they found the chamber. Some scholars now believe the temple was part of Egypt's subterranean theology, a lesser-known aspect of their cosmology where the underworld was not a place of punishment, but of rest and renewal. The drowned temple would then symbolize the womb of the earth, where creation slept between awakenings. That idea is not without precedent. In the Book of the Caverns, the sun god Ra journeys through 6 caverns beneath the Nile each night, shedding light on the dead before being reborn at dawn. The temple that sleeps beneath the river may have been built as a physical embodiment of that myth, a place where priests enacted the sun's nightly descent, carrying its flame beneath the surface to ensure the world's rebirth. And perhaps, in their devotion, they sealed the temple in more than metaphor. Local lore insists that the river still guards its sanctuary jealously. Fishermen who drop nets too close say they sometimes come up burned, as though touched by unseen fire. Others report hearing chants beneath the current, low, rhythmic tones that pulse with the waves. During a particularly dry season in 1973, when the river level dropped for several weeks, villagers near the site swore they saw the tops of columns just beneath the surface, gleaming like marble eyes. But by morning they were gone. In Esna's small museum, a weathered stele tells the same story in simpler words. The god slept, and the river covered him with breath. Perhaps it is only sediment and coincidence, the Nile's gentle cruelty, burying memory as it nourishes life. Yet there is something poetic in the thought that a temple of stillness would choose the river's heart for its grave. Archaeologists often speak of Egypt's obsession with eternity, but eternity, it seems, has its own desire for secrecy. Professor Taher's final papers, published after his death in 1971, hinted that the sleeping temple might predate the dynastic period altogether. He cited the roughness of the tool marks, the absence of royal names, the primitive iconography. "It feels," he wrote, "like a memory that built itself before language. Modern dating methods suggest otherwise. The surviving sandstone fragments belong to the early New Kingdom, perhaps the reign of Thutmose III. Yet the unease remains. For in one recovered inscription, the scribe carved a strange prophecy. When the stars sink into the river, and the river remembers the sky, then the temple will wake. No one knows what it means. Perhaps it is only poetry. But the Nile has always blurred the line between myth and truth. If you stand by the Esna Lock today, where modern engineers control the ancient flood, you can sometimes see tiny bubbles rising from nowhere, soft, steady, rhythmic. The locals shrug. They've seen it all their lives. Yet those who listen carefully say the bubbles form in patterns, as if exhaling in time with a hidden heart. Divers have tried to trace their source, but the current becomes strangely turbulent in that zone, spinning their compasses uselessly. At night, when the lights of the city dim, the river turns into a ribbon of darkness. And if you lean close, you might hear it, the faint echo of something vast moving far below. Not sound exactly, more like memory flowing. It was a single room, circular and perfectly smooth, as though turned by the hands of a god. In the center stood a flat stone door, framed but unmoving, sealed without hinge or seam. Around it, dozens of small alcoves held offerings. Alabaster bowls filled with dust, fragments of papyrus turned to shadow, the remnants of blue lotus petals still clinging to scent. Above the door, a single line of hieroglyphs glimmered in lamplight. In the Museum of Antiquities in Cairo, among thousands of forgotten fragments, there lies a small stone tablet from Esna that few notice. Its surface is etched with a prayer written in both hieroglyphs and early Demotic. We built this for the God who desired silence. May his temple sleep until the world forgets noise. How strange to worship sleep itself. Yet perhaps that is what all temples do in the end. The priests who built it are dust now. The river that drowned it still runs, carrying silt, fish, and stars across millennia. But somewhere beneath that steady current, the stone remains, waiting, dreaming, and maybe, just maybe, the temple has not been lost, only resting. In dreams, water often stands for memory, deep, unfathomable, reflective. To close one's eyes beside the Nile is to hear all of history breathing. Empires rise, languages fade, yet the current never stops speaking. It is possible that the temple still echoes through that voice, whispering its old prayers to the God who sleeps beneath the tide. Perhaps one night, when the flood comes stronger than before, when moonlight ripples like silver veins through the dark, the sand will shift again, and for a single breath, the roof of the temple will glimmer beneath the surface. And if anyone sees it, they will not speak. To open is to remember. To remember is to return. Because some miracles belong only to the silence that follows them. So tonight, as you listen to the quiet flow of time, imagine it. The water moving slowly over sunken pillars, the echoes of chants dissolving into the current, the weight of centuries pressing down like a dream that refuses to end. The river does not forget. It carries memory in every drop, wrapping it in motion, in patience, in endless return. And far beneath that tranquil surface, a temple sleeps, not dead, not gone, only dreaming the world back into light. Perhaps it waits for us, or perhaps it waits for the world to grow quiet enough to hear it again. Until then, the Nile flows on, and the temple keeps its promise, to rest beneath the water, beneath time, beneath words. Cartwright's team spent 3 nights within that chamber, measuring, sketching, praying without knowing they prayed. Some claim to hear faint vibrations, a low hum that pulsed through the stone like a heartbeat. Others said the air grew heavier as they worked, pressing against their chests as though time itself resisted their breath. In the Valley of Kings, the air itself feels ancient. Each breath tastes faintly of limestone and time, the residue of centuries exhaled from the earth. Beneath the cliffs of Thebes, where the sun burns the rock into gold by day and cools it into violet shadow by night, lie tombs that hum with silence. Most have been mapped, numbered, measured. Yet there is one the maps refuse to keep. A chamber whispered about by guides and gravediggers, absent from every official record. They call it the Chamber of the Breathless Kings. It does not appear in the notebooks of Howard Carter or Belzoni. No photograph, no coordinate. Only fragments of rumor and one fragile letter, dated 1923, found decades later in a London antiquarian's archive. The letter bears no signature, only an initial R. It begins, "We found the room they spoke of, though no tomb should lie so deep. There were no mummies, no gold. Only the air, still and heavy, as though it waited to breathe again." The story begins in the years just after Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb. The world's eyes turned toward Egypt, drawn by gold and myth. But among the local diggers of Luxor, another legend stirred, of a tunnel beyond KV-62, one that led not to treasure, but to something the priests had sealed long before the boy king's birth. They said it belonged to no single ruler, but to the essence of kingship itself. Where the breath of the gods was kept, they whispered. A small British-led expedition funded by an eccentric collector named Reginald Hathorne began searching in 1923. Their goal was not public glory, but private discovery. They excavated at night, guided by an elderly foreman named Hassan Abd El-Munayyim, who claimed his grandfather once guarded a door that breathed. The team's notes, later recovered from a ruined tent near the valley's edge, describe a fissure hidden behind a false wall, narrow, winding downward, carved through unmarked stone. The deeper they dug, the cooler the air became, until torches burned blue and silent. At last, the passage opened into a chamber circular and smooth as glass. In his final entry, Cartwright wrote, "It was unlike any tomb they had ever seen. No sarcophagus, no wall scenes of Osiris or the journey through the Duat. Only a ring of alabaster jars placed in a perfect spiral from the center outward, 27 in all. Each sealed with black resin, each bearing a single hieroglyph. Shut, meaning breath or spirit. The walls themselves were blank, except for a single inscription etched into the ceiling so faint it could only be seen by tilting the light. When the body dies, the breath remains. Guard it, and the world remembers." Hathorne wrote in his field journal, "The air within is different, dense, metallic, faintly sweet. We breathe it and feel as though the lungs forget to empty. It is not silence we hear, but the absence of our own exhalation." In ancient Egyptian belief, Ka, the vital essence, was as sacred as flesh. Upon death, the Ka was sustained by offerings and breath rituals, the opening of the mouth ceremony, so the spirit could speak again in the afterlife. But there are older texts, rarely cited, that suggest a darker continuity, the idea that certain priests collected the last breaths of kings, preserving them as divine relics, not to worship but to protect. The Book of Caverns mentions the houses of breath, chambers where the life of pharaohs was stored to guard the wind from decay. No physical evidence has ever confirmed such places, only carvings of jars surrounded by stars, and priests wearing masks shaped like open mouths. If such a chamber existed, perhaps this was it. The stone feels alive. When we touch it, our lamps flicker though the air is still. Perhaps it is not a door but a wall of forgetting, the threshold between memory and oblivion. The dig team remained underground for 3 nights, studying the jars, sketching, listening. Some claimed they could hear a faint humming from within the vessels, like wind trapped in a shell. Others said they heard whispers, indistinct, layered, endless. The notes become erratic after the second night. A line from one of the workers reads simply, "Do not breathe near the center. The air remembers." By dawn of the 4th day, the expedition vanished. Weeks later, the Antiquities Department found their camp deserted. The entrance was sealed by a collapse, as if the rock itself had folded inward. Only Hathorne's broken lantern remained. Its glass was blackened from within, the same curious detail seen at the door beneath the sand. The report concluded, "Tunnel abandoned after accident. No further excavation authorized." The chamber once found was lost again. Still, fragments resurface like bones through sand. In 1978, a local shepherd discovered an alabaster jar washed from a wadi after heavy rain. It bore the same hieroglyph for breath. When opened, the jar contained only fine dust, pale gray, slightly magnetic. Testing revealed traces of natron and cedar resin, both used in mummification, but also a strange crystalline residue similar to mica, not native to that region. Scientists offered no explanation. The jar disappeared from the Luxor Museum's archives 2 years later. That was the last line he ever wrote. The remainder of the journal ends mid-sentence. A stroke of ink broken by the tremor of a hand. Rumors grew. Some said museum staff heard low sighing sounds near the display before it vanished. Others claimed the jar exhaled when the moon rose. Superstition, perhaps, yet the story persists. Egypt's ancient landscape is full of such contradictions. Tombs that seem to breathe, statues that seem to pulse under light. Modern sensors often detect shifts in air pressure deep within sealed chambers. The earth still moving, the limestone exhaling moisture after millennia. But some anomalies resist physics. In 2018, thermal scans of the valley revealed unexplained heat signatures beneath an unexcavated area near KV9, the tomb of Ramesses V and 6. The pattern resembled a perfect circle, colder at the center, as if something within absorbed heat rather than emitted it. Researchers planned to drill, but the project was suddenly halted. Environmental preservation concerns, the ministry said. Locals whispered otherwise, that the machines overheated, and the engineers complained of pressure headaches, as though the mountain itself were holding its breath. It is possible that the chamber of the breathless kings was never meant to be entered at all. In the mythology of the afterlife, Adam, the creator, exhales the first wind, giving birth to life, and when creation ends, he inhales again, drawing all things back into himself. To open such a chamber might be to disturb that cosmic rhythm, to break the cycle of breath that sustains time. Ancient priests may have built it not to entomb the dead, but to preserve the world's equilibrium, a sanctuary for the divine inhale. Each jar perhaps held a symbolic fragment of that act. The breath of a king returned to the gods' keeping. The spiral arrangement could signify eternity, the pattern of galaxies, hurricanes, lungs, and maybe the chamber's silence was the holiest part. There is a story told among the modern workers of Luxor that on certain nights, when the wind falls still in the valley, they hear a low sigh rising from the ground. A single exhalation, long and hollow, carrying the scent of myrrh. They cross themselves, whisper prayers, and leave the mountain untouched until dawn. A few say that if you stand very still, the sound aligns with your breathing, until you can no longer tell which breath is yours and which belongs to the earth. One old guardian called it the remembrance of kings. Every pharaoh inhaled the air of the last, he said. That is why Egypt never dies. The breath only moves from one chest to another. Today, no official excavation acknowledges such a place. Yet deep scan imaging continues to reveal uncharted cavities beneath the valley floor, voids the size of cathedrals, their entrances sealed by nature or intention. Perhaps one of them is the chamber itself, waiting patiently, filled with invisible life. And if it is, what happens when the seal finally breaks? When modern machines pull that air into daylight, the same air that once filled the lungs of kings. Would we hear a sound? Or would the wind itself pause, as if remembering what it was? Weeks later, another team sent by the Antiquities Service found the camp abandoned. Tents collapsed, tools half buried, maps torn by wind. The entrance itself had vanished, reclaimed by dunes as though the desert had exhaled and covered its secret again. Only one lantern remained, wedged in the sand, its glass blackened from within. Night settles again over Thebes. The valley gleams under a white moon, every ridge etched in silver. The tombs sleep quietly, their guardians dozing under stars that have watched this place for 5,000 years. Somewhere beneath, stone lungs hold their breath, the weight of millennia pressing upon them like a lullaby. If you listen long enough, the silence deepens until it feels alive, the kind of silence that waits for breath, not to end it but to begin again. Perhaps that is what the ancients meant to teach, that immortality is not in gold or name or monument, but in the space between inhalation and release. The sacred pause that binds one life to another. The chamber still sleeps. The jars remain sealed. And Egypt, eternal as ever, continues to breathe, through wind and dust and dream, the breath of all its kings entwined as one. It begins with a whisper, not a human voice, but the sound of parchment shifting in the dark, dry, deliberate, almost alive. Somewhere in the heart of the Egyptian desert, where the cliffs of the Wadi Natrun rise like sleeping lions, a forgotten monastery still stands. Its walls are cracked, its frescoes faded, yet the air inside hums softly, as if something unseen still reads aloud from its ancient library. The monks call this place Der al-Samt, the Monastery of Silence. Few know it exists. It does not appear in guidebooks or maps, only in an old travel diary written by a Coptic pilgrim named Minas of Hermopolis around the 9th century. In his notes, preserved in the Vatican archives, he wrote, "The official report listed environmental disappearance, a polite term for nothing known. Yet the locals refused to guide any further expeditions to that place. They said that at night, when the wind moves right, you can hear a door breathing under the sand. I heard the scriptures breathe when the moon was full. The letters shone like oil upon water. I dared not look too long." Egypt's deserts have always hidden books as much as they have hidden bones. The dry air preserves everything: papyrus, ink, fragments of thought. It was in these sands that the Gnostic scrolls of Nag Hammadi were found in 1945, buried in jars as if sleeping. But older whispers speak of another cache, one the monks refused to unearth, for the writings were said to be alive. They called them the scrolls that spoke in dreams. According to monastic lore, they were copied from visions rather than speech, written by scribes who claimed to hear the voice of angels not in waking, but in sleep. Each scroll began with the same phrase, "I was spoken through." Scholars have long dismissed it as myth, a poetic flourish of early mystics. Yet fragments attributed to this lost collection do exist. One lies in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, a piece of parchment bearing faint, looping script that glows faintly under moonlight, a phenomenon modern conservators attribute to traces of crushed malachite and copper oxide in the ink. But the monks of Wadi Natrun have another explanation. They say the letters remember sound. In 1911, a young archaeologist named Father Lucien Moreau, a Jesuit scholar fluent in Coptic and Greek, traveled through the desert valleys searching for lost manuscripts of early Christianity. He reached Deir al-Samt after hearing rumors of a library untouched since the 6th century. The monks, wary but curious, allowed him inside. Moreau described the library as a room of lightless gold, its walls blackened by centuries of oil lamps, its shelves lined with papyrus rolls bound in linen. He counted nearly 300, most unreadable, their ink faded to dust. But one he wrote seemed different. Its script shimmered when I breathed upon it. The lines curved like vines. I thought it illusion, yet the letters moved, not shifting in place, but pulsing softly, as though drawn toward sound. He stayed 3 nights. Each evening, as the desert cooled and the wind died, he reported hearing faint murmurs, syllables without language, phrases that rose and faded like the rhythm of sleep. The monks told him to ignore it. It is only the scripture remembering itself, they said. On the 4th night, he dreamt of a vast hall of reeds swaying beneath the stars. A voice spoke through them, low, rhythmic, endless. When he woke, the scroll lay open beside his bed, though he had locked it away. On its surface, a new line had appeared, written in the same glowing script. To read is to awaken the one who wrote. Moreau left the monastery the next morning, shaken and silent. His journals, recovered decades later in a Jesuit archive in Marseille, end abruptly after that entry. The monks of Deir al-Samt still refuse to discuss those scrolls. They claim the texts are no longer read aloud, not since the Night of the Echo. It is said that centuries ago, a novice monk, young and impatient, tried to recite one of the dream scrolls during the night vigil. As he spoke, the air thickened, the candles dimmed. Each word echoed twice, once in his own voice, once in another that followed half a heartbeat behind. The second voice did not stop when he did. The brothers found him at dawn, asleep on the floor, breathing slowly but unable to wake. They sealed the library that day, leaving only prayers carved into the door. Words are breath. Let them rest. Some historians think the legend arose from the peculiar acoustics of old desert monasteries. Dome chambers that amplify low frequencies, making sound seem to double. Others believe the phenomenon might relate to the use of cinnabar and copper pigments in Coptic inks, both faintly luminescent and toxic, capable of producing hallucinations in poorly ventilated spaces. For decades, no one mentioned the door that remembers. Cartwright's findings were stored in the archives of the Egyptian Museum, labeled unverified. Yet scholars who studied the fragments noticed something impossible. The same spiral-ank symbol appearing on predynastic pottery from Hierakonpolis, on Old Kingdom tomb ceilings at Midam, even on a stone fragment found beneath the Great Pyramid's foundation pit. It seemed less a decoration and more a signature, a mark belonging to an age Egypt itself no longer claimed. And yet, even science leaves room for awe. When researchers from Cairo University studied several recovered fragments in 2003, they discovered something unexpected: microparticles of hematite within the ink, a mineral that can retain magnetic resonance. When the scrolls were placed in proximity to low-frequency sound, the particles vibrated subtly, as if echoing ancient speech. It was a coincidence, surely, an acoustic artifact. But the lead researcher, Dr. Karim Haddad, wrote afterward, "For a moment, I thought I heard the ink whisper." He never published his findings. Egyptian tradition has always held dreams as doors between worlds. In the Book of the Dead, dream visions guide the soul through the afterlife. Pharaohs sought counsel in sleep. Priests of Imhotep interpreted divine messages upon waking. Even the goddess Thoth was said to write upon the hearts of dreamers. So perhaps it is not strange that some texts would claim origin from dreams themselves. One Coptic homily, translated from Greek, describes scribes who listened to the silence between stars to receive holy words. Another fragment found near Nag Hammadi reads, "We wrote by the light of sleep. Our ink was the breath between two thoughts." The scrolls that spoke in dreams may have been part of this mystical lineage, writings born not from revelation, but from that threshold between waking and eternity. Some modern archaeologists suggest it could be linked to early astronomical cults. Priests who believed the soul ascended through gates of memory, mapped to the stars. The idea echoes in the pyramid texts of Unas, where the king proclaims, "I open the gate of the sky. I remember the names of those before me." To remember was to resurrect. To forget was to die forever. Today, the monastery stands half-buried in sand. A few monks still tend its chapel, their chants echoing softly at dawn. They use no electric light, only small oil lamps, the same kind that flickered when Minos of Hermopolis first heard the pages breathe. Visitors who sleep within the compound sometimes report strange dreams, hearing footsteps pacing the library though no one is inside. Whispers in languages they do not know but somehow understand. One traveler in 1987 described seeing letters form in midair above the old lectern, shining pale green before fading into dust. He woke with a single word in his mind: "Listen." The monks simply smiled when he told them. "Now the scrolls have spoken to you," they said. There is something profoundly human in that image. Knowledge that hums even when forgotten, language that continues to breathe through time. Every text we read, every story we whisper before sleep, carries some echo of the voices that shaped it. Perhaps the dream scrolls are only a symbol of that: memory turned into sound, meaning turned into vibration. Or perhaps they are more. When the wind passes through the narrow corridors of Deir al-Samt, it produces a faint tone, a single sustained note like a sigh. The monks believe it is the breath of the scrolls themselves, reminding the world that silence, too, has a voice. They light a lamp whenever it happens, not to chase it away, but to accompany it, to listen without fear. Perhaps, then, the door beneath the sand was not meant to be entered, but to be remembered. If you visit Wadi Natrun today, the air smells of salt and dust. The monasteries there remain sanctuaries of stillness, stone lungs breathing prayer into the endless desert. Somewhere among them, behind a locked wooden door, rest the scrolls that no one dares to read. And sometimes, When the moon hangs low and pale over the cliffs, locals say you can hear them again. Faint rustling, like the turning of pages beneath sand. The desert wind carries the sound for miles, soft as breath, patient as eternity. Perhaps they are only stories remembering themselves. Perhaps the words are still speaking in dreams, waiting for listeners who have not yet been born. And maybe, if you fall asleep with the sound of pages in your mind, they will whisper to you too. Not loudly, not in words, only as a breath that sounds like meaning just before dawn. Because some voices never fade. They simply learn to speak in silence. At dusk, Egypt turns to gold. The sand softens to amber, the river becomes bronze, and for a single breath before night, the world stands between light and memory. It is the hour the ancients called keeper, the moment of becoming, when what is seen begins to slip into what is remembered. In the ruins of Thebes, among fallen columns and the slow pulse of evening wind, there once stood a doorway built for that very moment. It was called Shiti-Ineb's, the Gate of the Two Shadows. No monument marks it now.
No coordinates, no carved lintel.
Only a handful of lines in a funerary hymn, preserved on the walls of a nobleman's tomb near Deir el-Bahari. At dusk I walk between my two shadows, the one that follows and the one that waits. The idea haunted early Egyptologists. For decades they believed the phrase metaphorical, a poetic image of death and rebirth. But in 1932, during excavations near the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, archaeologist Salim Farid discovered a collapsed corridor leading to a small antechamber carved deep into the cliff. Its walls were unusually smooth, its floor inlaid with dark hematite polished to a mirror-like sheen. The chamber aligned perfectly with the western horizon, where the sun dies each day. When light entered through the narrow slit at sunset, it divided. Two beams, twin shadows, fell on opposite walls, forming mirrored silhouettes of anyone standing at the center. Farid called it the Gate of the Two Shadows. He believed it was once part of an initiation rite, a symbolic passage where the soul confronted its twin. For the Egyptians, every person carried two essences: the Ka, the life force, and the Ba, the spirit that travels beyond death. At the moment of twilight, they said, the two could meet, one preparing to rest, the other to journey. At night, the desert returns to silence. The dunes glow faintly beneath the moon, rippling like the skin of an ancient sea. Somewhere beneath them, the door still waits, sealed by time and by mercy. Travelers who pass through that region sometimes report strange things. Compasses spinning, watches stopping, the feeling of being watched by something vast yet patient. Farid's notes describe the place in reverent detail. The air here feels thick with dusk, even at noon. One hears footsteps that are not echoes. When the light enters, the chamber breathes. He and his team found no sarcophagus, no offering table, only a narrow recess cut into the back wall, empty except for a single carved feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth and balance. Beneath it, faint hieroglyphs read, "He who walks between shadows carries no weight." When the evening sun touched the slit, the floor seemed to shimmer as if turning liquid. Two shadows appeared, one darker, one faint, stretching across the polished stone to meet in the center. For a moment, they overlapped perfectly, becoming one. Then the light faded, and the chamber returned to stillness. Farid's assistant, Amal Zara, wrote in her journal, "We stood in the meeting of our own reflections, and for an instant, I could not tell which was mine. Modern physicists might call it an effect of refracted light through dust and quartz. But to the priests of Thebes, it was sacred geometry, architecture built to imitate the soul's journey. Every evening, they taught, Ra, the sun god, descended into the western gate, dividing into two forms, one to die with the light, the other to guide the stars through night. The faithful believed that by standing within the gate of the two shadows, they shared in that divine passage, learning how to let go of oneself while another awoke. Ancient inscriptions from the Book of the Amjuet echo this duality. Once, a Bedouin shepherd found an old bronze medallion half-buried near his camp. It bore the spiral ankh, its edges worn smooth. He sold it to a merchant in Cairo, who later claimed it changed temperature in his hand, cold at first, then warm as blood. The medallion has since vanished into a private collection, but the legend lingers, a mark from those who walked between worlds. The sun has two bodies. One travels the waters, one travels the dark. So too, they said, did every soul. There are traces of these rituals scattered through Theban ruins, twin corridors, double statues, mirrored halls. The temple of Luxor itself was aligned so that the setting sun of midwinter struck the sanctuary's rear wall, splitting its light into two equal beams. To walk through that light was to walk between worlds. Farid's discovery seemed to confirm that this belief was not mere metaphor but architecture made divine. He planned a full excavation of the chamber, but within weeks, the site was sealed by a sudden rockfall. The gate was buried again, and Farid's funding withdrawn. He spent the rest of his life lecturing about Egypt's lost science of twilight. His students called it obsession. He called it memory. Yet fragments endure. In 2010, infrared imaging of Deir el-Bahari revealed faint voids beneath the cliffs near the supposed chamber's location. Narrow tunnels extending westward, their symmetry precise to within centimeters. One, curiously, leads nowhere. It simply stops, as though cut short by design. Another opens into a space too small for burial, too perfect for ritual. No excavation has followed, the rock too unstable, the ministry too cautious. But satellite scans show that once each year, at the solstice, light aligns exactly along that buried axis, striking what was once the chamber's center. The light still finds its gate, even when buried. Legends say that those who stand between their two shadows see the truth of what they carry. Some monastic texts from the late period describe initiates fasting for 40 days before entering the twilight chamber. Inside, they would wait in silence until sunset, when the light would split and reveal their second form. If the shadows merged perfectly, it was said the initiate had achieved Nihei, the eternal moment, the equilibrium of soul. If not, the door would never open again. To the Egyptians, shadow was not absence. It was proof of being the soul's echo. They even gave it a name, Shut. The Shut could wander, follow, or detach. Tomb paintings often show multiple silhouettes behind the deceased, signifying the layers of existence that trailed through eternity. The gate of the two shadows was perhaps their way of harmonizing those layers, to leave the world balanced between presence and departure. At dusk in Thebes, the modern traveler still sees the same light those priests once saw. The cliffs glow crimson, the air stills, and for a brief instant the valley seems weightless. Tourists turn away, heading back to their hotels. The guides call it closing time. But if one lingers just a little longer, as the last ray slips away, something else happens. Your own shadow doubles. Flickers, splits, one leaning east, one west. It lasts only seconds, a trick of optics, but the feeling lingers. That you have briefly stood beside yourself, not in front or behind, but alongside. The ancients built entire temples to that fleeting illusion. Perhaps they understood what we have forgotten. That in every life there are two selves. The one that moves through the day, and the one that waits quietly in the dark, carrying what the light cannot bear. There is an old Coptic legend, preserved in an 18th century manuscript in Luxor's bishopric, that tells of a monk who rediscovered the gate. He dreamed of two rivers, one of light, one of shadow, meeting beneath a golden door. When he woke, he wandered into the desert until dusk and found a fissure glowing faintly between rocks. He entered and felt no fear, only calm. Inside, he saw his two shadows embrace, and when he stepped out again, he cast none. The next morning, his footprints led back toward the monastery, but none away from it. Some say the gate of the two shadows is not a place but a moment, appearing only to those who have learned to walk in balance between memory and desire. Some believe the door leads not to another chamber, but to another memory, the collective breath of civilizations long dissolved. Others say it seals something in, a truth too vast for mortal minds. The ancients often spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods and humans shared the same horizon. Perhaps this door belonged to that age, a relic of the boundary between divine and human, light and forgetting. Perhaps that's what the ancients sought. Not immortality, but equilibrium, to walk without weight, to merge with their own reflection until nothing remained but stillness. Even now, when archaeologists map the tombs of Thebes, the data sometimes shows ghost corridors. Paths that appear in one scan and vanish in the next, like reflections shifting with light. They call it image noise. The priests might have called it shadow movement. And so the gate may still exist, flickering between the real and the remembered, opening not in stone, but in the quiet between breaths. Night has fallen. The desert cools. The Nile turns black and soft as silk. If you were to stand there now, where Hatshepsut's temple meets the mountain, you might see your own outline quiver in the moonlight, not fading but multiplying, like two wings folding together. For in every human life, there are two shadows, the one cast by the sun, and the one cast by the soul. The gate of the two shadows waits for both. When they finally meet, the desert will breathe again, and the light at last will remember where it came from. And perhaps that is why even the pharaohs turned their gaze away. They, too, knew the danger of remembrance, that to recall the divine too closely is to lose oneself in it. The Valley of Kings sleeps beneath a crown of silence. At noon, the air quivers with heat. At night, it hums. The cliffs seem to hold sound inside them. Echoes too faint for the living ear, too patient for haste. Guides call it the whisper of wind across limestone. But the older workers, the ones who have spent their lives among the tombs, say otherwise. They call it Hagar el-Nafez, the stone that breathes. They mean a single block, half buried at the base of the cliffs near the tomb of Ramesses VI, a piece of black basalt the size of a doorway. It bears no inscription, no carving. Yet when touched, it trembles softly, as if remembering a long-ago sound. The first record of this strange stone appears in 1898, in the travel diary of an Austrian Egyptologist named Dr. Hermann Lenz. He wrote of it briefly between cataloging tomb paintings and cataloging air temperatures. There is a block of basalt that hums when struck, not unlike a drum under water. The Bedouins avoid it, saying it holds the voices of the dead. Lenz dismissed it as superstition, perhaps a quirk of temperature and resonance. But the note lingered, and later scholars searched for the stone again. Most failed to find it. The valley shifts over time. The sand covers, uncovers, erases. Then, in 1967, during restoration work near KV9, a French acoustics researcher named Dr. Alain Corbiel accidentally recorded an odd frequency underfoot, a faint harmonic tone registering at 32 Hz, below the range of normal hearing. It emanated from a solid object buried just meters beneath the surface. When they cleared the dust, they found it. A polished slab of basalt, warm to the touch even at night. When the wind passed across its edge, it vibrated, not loudly, but distinctly, like a string plucked in a dream. Egypt's temples and tombs were never silent. The ancients understood sound as sacred geometry. Vibration turned to ritual. At Dendra, the ceilings depict the goddess Hathor holding a sistrum, an instrument that shakes the air into life. In Karnak's hypostyle hall, the architecture itself sings. When struck, the columns resonate at perfect harmonic intervals. Perhaps the stone of voices was part of this forgotten science, a tool for ritual or memory. The Egyptians called the word Heikau magic through sound. To speak was to create. Every name, every prayer, carried vibration that shaped the unseen. So imagine a priest, 5,000 years ago, standing before the basalt slab at dusk. He strikes it with a mallet of copper or wood, and the stone hums, low, deep, endless. The sound rolls down the corridors, awakening the painted gods from their stillness. The tomb becomes an instrument. The silence becomes a song. When Corbiel's team tested the resonance, they found the stone vibrated at precise intervals corresponding to the ancient musical scale used for temple chants, the same pattern discovered on surviving harps from the tombs of Thebes. It was as if the rock itself remembered the frequency of prayer. Local workers refused to stay near it after sunset. They claimed to hear murmurs rising from within, like many voices layered in sleep. Corbiel, intrigued, placed sensitive microphones around the slab one night. The recordings captured nothing at first, only the desert wind. Then, just past midnight, a faint rhythm emerged. A sequence of 3 tones repeating every few minutes. When slowed down and amplified, the pattern resembled human breath. Corbiel wrote in his notes, "The valley is not silent, it exhales through stone." His report was never published. The Ministry of Antiquities sealed the stone under protective sand, citing preservation. Corbiel left Egypt soon after and spent the rest of his life studying temple acoustics, convinced that Egypt's true language was vibration, not inscription. Now, nearly a century after Cartwright's vanished dig, satellite images of the Fayum region show subtle geometric anomalies beneath the sand. Outlines too regular to be natural, faint rectangles where no structure should be. The desert, it seems, still holds its breath. Researchers plan to survey it again, armed with drones and radar, yet no permit has been granted. Bureaucracy, they say, but perhaps something else, an older veto. The idea of speaking stones is not new. Herodotus wrote of singing statues at Thebes, monuments that emitted tones at dawn. The most famous of these, the Colossi of Memnon, still stand west of Luxor. When the morning sun warmed their cracked surfaces, the expansion of air caused them to emit soft, musical notes. Roman travelers heard it and believed the statues alive, oracles greeting the sun. Emperor Hadrian himself came to hear them in AD 130. Perhaps the stone that remembered voices belonged to the same lineage, a relic of that strange communion between sound and divinity. But the Bedouins' tale runs deeper. They say the stone is not singing to the air, but listening to it. It absorbs voices, the chants of priests, the cries of mourners, the names spoken by kings. Every word that ever echoed through the valley, they say, was swallowed by the basalt. What hums now is memory. In 2016, a team of Egyptian archaeologists revisited the site with advanced sensors. The readings were inconclusive seismic activity, they said. Yet one researcher, Dr. Noura Abbas, reported something she couldn't explain. During a quiet afternoon, as she cataloged nearby pottery, she placed her palm against the basalt. "It felt as though it breathed under my hand," she said later. "Not movement, rhythm. Slow, steady, like a sleeping heart." She swore she heard a faint echo inside her skull, a wordless vibration that lingered for hours afterward, like a song half remembered. Dr. Abbas never returned to the valley. Because every so often, when the wind uncovers a corner of that forgotten basin, the sand shifts differently, as if moving around something solid, something listening. Those who have seen it swear they feel a pulse beneath their feet. Not loud, not strong, just steady, like a memory waiting to wake. If you listen to Egypt's older myths, they speak often of stone and voice. The god Ptah created the world not through thought but through speech carved into matter. In one hymn it is written, "He spoke the names and they took form. The mountains answered him, and the dust became breath." The Egyptians did not believe sound vanished, only that it changed form. Every echo was a continuation of creation itself. Perhaps this is why their tombs were filled with texts to be spoken aloud. Not merely read, but heard. They believed that words, when uttered again, reawakened the dead. To speak was to remember. To remember was to live. So maybe the basalt stone, humming quietly through the centuries, is not strange at all. It is simply continuing the ritual, carrying the resonance of all voices that ever touched it. Late one evening, a local guide named Fathi, who has worked the valley for 40 years, told a visiting researcher his own story. He said that during a sandstorm 20 years ago, the wind blew fiercely through the gorge, and for hours the valley roared like the sea. When it finally stopped, he approached the basalt slab to check for damage. It was warm to the touch. "I leaned my ear close," he said, "and I heard them, hundreds of voices, far away, speaking together, not angry, not sad, just remembering." He paused, then added, "When I stepped back, it stopped, but the silence after, it felt full, as if it was still listening." Science may one day explain it. Basalt is dense. Its crystalline structure amplifies vibration. The shape of the valley can channel wind in rhythmic bursts. Acoustic resonance, nothing more. Yet even so, those who have stood there at night describe a strange calm, a sense that the earth itself has ears. And perhaps that feeling matters more than the facts, because whether myth or resonance, the effect is the same. The listener slows, breathes softer, begins to hear their own pulse aligning with the hum of the ground. For a moment, the body and the desert share a rhythm. Memory becomes atmosphere. There's a line from the Book of Coming Forth by Day, what we call the Book of the Dead, that reads, "My voice is in the stone, and the stone is in my voice." It was meant as a prayer for immortality, but maybe it's also a description of Egypt itself, a civilization that spoke through granite and survived by echo. And so, each night, when the winds descend through the valley, the air vibrates against that dark slab, carrying the whispers of millennia. Perhaps the kings still speak through it. Perhaps the priests still chant. Or perhaps it's the desert remembering our own footsteps, our questions, our awe, our small, fleeting breath. If you were to go there now, when the moon hangs white above the cliffs and the world seems emptied of sound, you might feel it too. The valley silent, the stars unmoving, and then just faintly, a hum, deep and low, like the earth dreaming through its sleep. You reach out, touch the cool basalt, and feel warmth beneath the skin. Not movement, not magic. If you were to stand there tonight, where the desert meets the line of stars, you might feel it too. A hush that deepens with every breath. The dunes shimmer pale gold, the air scented faintly with dust and time. And though nothing moves, it feels as if something is opening, very slowly, beneath the surface. Just the gentle proof that silence is never truly silent. Somewhere in the dark, the voices still stir. The stone remembers, and so does the night. In the western desert, far beyond the green breath of the Nile, lies a silence so complete it seems to listen. The dunes stretch without edge, the sky burns without mercy, and the air itself feels older than time. Yet once, long before maps and names, a city stood here, luminous, ordered, alive. Its people carved streets from sandstone and traced the stars with their temples. Then it vanished, swallowed whole by the desert. They called it Zerzura, the city of birds, the white city, the oasis of the holy mountain. Its legend survives in Arabic chronicles of the Middle Ages, described as a paradise lost in the Libyan sands. Travelers claim to have seen white walls gleaming like bone, gates guarded by stone lions, fountains overflowing in a land of thirst. Some said it was haunted, others swore it was heaven. But in 1932, a pilot named Laszlo Almasi, later immortalized in The English Patient, reported glimpsing something from the sky. The faint outline of streets beneath the dunes, a geometry too deliberate to be nature's. The coordinates were marked, then forgotten in the war that followed. The city sank again, buried not once, but twice. Perhaps the door is still there, remembering all who touched it. Perhaps it dreams of light and hands and voices that once dared to descend. Or perhaps it was never meant to be found again, only imagined like a promise between worlds. It would take nearly a century for anyone to find it again. In 2019, a satellite scan by an Anglo-Egyptian team mapping ancient caravan routes revealed anomalies near the Gilf Kabir Plateau, faint rectangular patterns extending for nearly half a kilometer. When ground teams arrived, they found low mounds and pottery fragments scattered across the sand. The shards were unusual. their glaze rich in cobalt blue, a color associated not with desert oases but with the workshops of Amarna, the city of Akhenaten. Was it possible that his followers, exiled heretics of the sun god Aten, had fled here after the fall of their faith? If so, Zerzura was not a myth at all, but a colony of outcasts who sought to preserve their light in the farthest shadows of Egypt. The desert, however, keeps its secrets with care. The first excavations uncovered a temple sunk half beneath the dunes. Its pillars were smooth and pale, carved from limestone brought hundreds of miles by caravan. Along the inner walls, faint inscriptions still clung to the stone, fragments of hymns to the Aten, the radiant disk. Yet the imagery was strange. Instead of the familiar rays ending in open hands, the carvings showed the sun descending beneath the horizon, its arms reaching downward into darkness. It was worship of the setting sun, not the rising one, an inversion of the king's theology. The god of light entering shadow. Archaeologist Dr. Hanan Morsi wrote in her field notes, "It is as if these people sought not the sun's face, but its memory. They built temples to dusk, not dawn." The inscriptions spoke of a journey to the place where light remembers itself. Perhaps this was what drove them deep into the desert, a pilgrimage toward silence, toward balance between brightness and forgetting. For some doors are not meant to open. Then came the second burial. Sometime during the late Roman period, violent sandstorms swept across the plateau. Ancient records from the oasis of Dakhla speak of a sea of wind that raged for 7 days, erasing villages and roads. When it passed, the caravan routes shifted, and Zerzura vanished beneath a new geography of dunes. Its memory lived only in whispers, travelers who dreamed of lost fountains, of white birds flying in circles above an unseen city. Centuries later, Bedouin tribes avoided that part of the desert, calling it Ard el Mafuta, the land of the missing. They said the ground was hollow, that the wind there spoke in voices. On clear nights, they claimed to see a pale glow beneath the sand, as if lamps still burned far below. In 2022, new expeditions returned, this time with radar capable of mapping subsurface voids. What they found astonished even the skeptics. Layers of architecture stacked upon one another, a city rebuilt upon the bones of another. The lower level was older, likely Middle Kingdom. It had wide courtyards, simple altars, stone vessels. The upper level, later by more than 1,000 years, bore Amarna-style inscriptions, delicate, ethereal. It seemed that after the first city fell to sand, another had risen atop it, only to meet the same fate. 2 lives, 2 deaths, sharing one grave. Hence the legend, the city buried twice. Among the findings was a tablet unlike any others, a slab of alabaster inscribed with a riddle. Some simply wait, listening to the wind, guarding the silence that built the world. We rose where the sun set, and we slept where dawn was born. To be seen twice is to be forgotten once. It was placed beside what appeared to be a ceremonial pool lined with obsidian. The pool was dry, yet its base still reflected the light like dark water. When researchers shone their lamps upon it, the reflection shimmered as though moving, a mirage captured in stone. Perhaps that was the heart of the city, a mirror built to reflect what the desert erases. The inhabitants of Zerzura must have lived at the edge of endurance, surviving on hidden wells, preserving grain and water through ingenious underground cisterns. They left behind delicate pottery, fragments of jewelry, and a single-wall painting of white birds flying toward a black horizon. The pigment was made from powdered gypsum and lapis, fragile, luminous, enduring. One inscription found nearby reads, "We built so that memory might sleep in beauty." It seems they knew their fate. They were building not for life, but for afterlife. A city meant to vanish, a monument to impermanence. And if you listen long enough, under the starlit breath of Egypt's eternal night, deserts are deceptive archives. They erase slowly, preserving even as they destroy. Beneath the dunes, every whisper of civilization still breathes. Fibers of cloth, broken amulets, the imprint of a child's heel in hardened sand. Archaeologists speak of ghost stratigraphy, layers of habitation so faint they appear only in temperature differentials, visible at dawn before the sun burns them away. In the Gilf Kabir, such images appear regularly now. Perfect lines of vanished streets, revealed by morning light and erased again by noon. The pattern repeats endlessly, emergence and concealment, remembrance and forgetting. The desert performs the same ritual as time itself. One evening, during the 2023 season, a sandstorm trapped Dr. Morsi and her team in their tents for 3 days. The wind howled, the air turned white, and the dunes shifted like waves. When the storm passed, they found the landscape changed. Their markers gone, the excavation filled with new sand. Yet in the freshly uncovered slope nearby, a small doorway had appeared, limestone, uncarved, leading nowhere. They cleared the entrance, expecting another room. But beyond the first meter lay only compact sand, sealed as if by design. On the lintel, a single symbol remained, a feather drifting downward. Dr. Morsi wrote in her journal, "It felt less like discovery and more like being watched, as though the city itself decides when to wake." The doorway was reburied the following week by the wind. Perhaps Zerzura was never meant to be found completely. You might hear it. Perhaps its purpose was to teach impermanence, to remind us that memory and sand follow the same law. What they hold, they also bury. The ancients may have understood this better than we do. In one recovered hymn, the priests of the hidden city wrote, "The desert is the breath of time. To build in it is to write upon the wind. Yet even the wind remembers." Maybe that is why the legends never die. The city continues to appear in dreams of travelers, in mirages that flicker just beyond reach. Some pilots swear they still see white patterns beneath the dunes when the sun is low, outlines of streets glowing briefly before vanishing again into shadow. If you were to fly above that sea of sand at twilight, you might see it too. Faint shapes moving below, like the ghost of architecture, like memory shifting under skin. For a moment, it would seem real. Walls gleaming, fountains glimmering, white birds rising through the haze. And then, as the wind breathes again, everything folds back into gold and silence. The city sleeps, the sand closes its eyes, and somewhere beneath, 2 layers of time rest against each other, like hands joined in prayer. The faint sound of stone remembering your name. It is said that Egypt remembers differently than other lands. It does not hold the past above the ground, but below it, storing each life, each dream, each city in quiet strata of remembrance. To uncover one is to awaken many. And so Zerzura, the city that was buried twice, remains both lost and present, visible only in the shimmer between waking and sleep. Perhaps that is why its legend endures, because it lives in the same place dreams do, under layers of forgetting, waiting for the light to find it once more. Tonight, if you close your eyes and listen to the hush between your breaths, you may hear the faint rush of desert wind, the soft voice of sand moving over stone. Imagine a city beneath it, white and patient, dreaming of flight. It does not call to be found. It only asks to be remembered. The Valley of the Queens lies west of Luxor, carved into the curve of the desert like a cradle. The air there feels gentler than in the Valley of the Kings. Softer light, warmer stone, a quietness that seems almost maternal. Beneath these cliffs, queens, princesses, and royal children once slept beneath painted ceilings of stars. But there is one tomb that bears no name.
No cartouche, no inscription, no face.
Only silence, perfect, deliberate, unbroken. They call it QV unknown. It begins, as many forgotten things do, with light. It was discovered in 1934 by the Italian Egyptologist Ernesto Schiaparelli, who had already unearthed the tomb of Queen Nefertari, the most celebrated wife of Ramesses II. But what he found in this new chamber was different, stripped of splendor, yet filled with presence. The walls were blank, smooth limestone polished like skin. At the center stood a black sarcophagus, carved from basalt, its lid slightly askew as if opened and closed again long ago. Inside lay no body, only a single lotus flower perfectly dried. Schiaparelli described the find with reverence. It is as though someone erased a life with tenderness, not violence. The tomb is not empty. It is listening. There were no hieroglyphs, no funerary texts, only small traces of pigment along the ceiling, faint stars painted in white and gold. The style matched the late 19th dynasty, but the workmanship was unlike anything in that era, restrained, almost modern, as though whoever built it understood that simplicity itself could be sacred. At first, scholars assumed it was an unfinished burial, perhaps for a royal consort who died before completion. But the more they studied it, the more contradictions emerged. The craftsmanship was precise, deliberate, perfect. The walls showed no sign of abandonment, and the sarcophagus lid, heavy beyond reason, bore faint scratches, not from tools, but from fingertips. Someone, at some time, had opened it by hand. Over the next decade, researchers pieced together fragments from nearby tomb debris, fragments of alabaster vessels inscribed only with a single hieroglyph Neb, meaning all, or Lady of Everything. One small amulet found within the rubble showed the throne name of a king long erased from records, Seti Meridaman, the son of Ramesses II, beside a female figure whose face had been deliberately chipped away. A pale reflection across the horizon, too soft to be dawn, too early to be day. The sands of Heliopolis shimmer faintly, as if remembering a time when the gods still walked in the open and sunlight was a language of its own. The ruins there lie quiet now, scattered across the northeastern edge of Cairo, where the Nile once bent like a thread of molten gold. But long before the city rose, Heliopolis was the temple of the sun, the place where Ra was said to climb the sky each morning, carried by fire and silence. Who was she? Egypt's history is filled with queens, some glorified, others erased. Among them, a few wielded power equal to kings. Hatshepsut, who wore the false beard of Pharaoh. Tuzret, who ruled briefly after Seti II. Nefertari, whose beauty became legend. But there was one name that lingered like a question in half-buried papyri. Neferura, daughter of Hatshepsut, priestess of Ammonius, the girl destined to inherit both crown and temple, and then lost. Her monuments were defaced after her mother's memory was condemned. Her name disappears from inscriptions after the 7th regnal year. Some scholars believe she died young. Others think she renounced her title and entered exile. But no burial of Neferura has ever been found. Until perhaps here, a tomb without name, yet with the serenity of someone who chose silence over erasure. In 1992, archaeologist Dr. Amal Hassan led a small team to re-examine Schiaparelli's site using modern techniques. Beneath the floor, ground radar detected a hidden chamber, a small alcove sealed with sandstone. When opened, they found a wooden box containing fragments of linen, a copper mirror, and a small cartouche carved from ivory. The cartouche was blank, but under infrared light, faint traces of pigment appeared, outlines of hieroglyphs too worn to see with the naked eye. When enhanced, they revealed a partial inscription. The one who chose to forget her name. Dr. Hassan wrote in her field notes, "They say there was once a mirror there, a disc so polished that it did not reflect faces, but the soul's own hidden light, crafted not of glass, but of electrum, that ancient alloy of gold and silver that shimmered like captured dawn. It was called the Eye of Ra, and its surface was said to burn falsehood from all who gazed upon it. Only the pure, the awakened, could see their reflection and remain unchanged. This is not the silence of omission, it is the silence of choice." In ancient Egypt, names were more than identity. They were existence itself. To erase a name was to destroy a soul. But to hide one's name willingly, to vanish from record, was the highest form of humility, a return to the eternal without possession. The unnamed queen may have chosen that path, to step away from memory into myth. Among the funerary texts of the coffin papers, there is one passage rarely cited. "She who remembers herself will not pass the gate. She who forgets will walk freely in the field of reeds." Perhaps this queen understood that truth. Perhaps she sought freedom through forgetting. Dr. Hassan's team also discovered a curious detail. The sarcophagus, when tapped lightly, produced a clear tone, a resonance similar to those basalt, singing stones found in the Valley of the Kings. The sound lingered, soft and low, like the echo of a human voice. They measured the frequency and found it matched the tone of a heart's resting rhythm, 70 beats per minute. Coincidence, perhaps? Or perhaps the tomb was built to breathe. One night, while mapping the chamber, a technician named Omar stayed behind to adjust lighting. When the others returned, he was sitting beside the sarcophagus, his lamp extinguished, eyes wet with tears. "She was here," he said quietly. "I felt her beside me. Not watching, just remembering. He could not explain further. The incident was never entered into the official report. Modern archaeology may never solve the mystery. DNA testing of the few linen traces revealed no conclusive results, too degraded by time. Radiocarbon dating placed the materials between 1250 and 1180 BCE, consistent with the late 19th dynasty. But beyond that, silence. And yet, that silence seems precisely the point. The tomb offers no answers, only calm. The blank walls seem to invite reflection rather than revelation. When you stand inside, sound disappears. Even your heartbeat feels distant. Many who enter describe the same sensation. That the air grows thicker, the world slows, and for a moment the self dissolves. Perhaps that is her true legacy, a queen who built a sanctuary for forgetting. The story of the mirror surfaces in fragments, a line in the pyramid texts, a half-erased relief near the Temple of Adam, and a curious record found in the writings of the Greek traveler Plutarch. He mentions a burnished disk that shone in the morning temple of the sun, which the priests veiled before noon. There's a story told by the guards of the valley, passed down from generation to generation. They say that on rare nights, when the moonlight spills into the unnamed tomb, a faint shimmer appears on the ceiling, the outline of a woman's face, serene and unafraid. She fades with the dawn, leaving only the stars painted above her. The guards call her the queen who sleeps without name. They never speak loudly near her door. They claim the wind changes direction there, cooler, softer, like breath on skin. Egyptologists have long debated whether the tomb should be opened again, scanned, or left untouched. The consensus now leans toward silence. To disturb her, one curator wrote, would be to defeat her purpose, and so she remains anonymous, intact, complete. Her tomb, though unnamed, draws quiet visitors who come not for spectacle, but for peace. Scholars, poets, monks, all leave with the same impression, that they have stood in the presence of someone who mastered what even kings could not, the art of disappearance. In life, every ruler sought to immortalize their name, to carve it in gold, to etch it into eternity. But perhaps this queen saw eternity differently. To her, immortality was not in remembrance, but in release. To shed one's name was to become infinite, like air, like shadow, like music that lingers after the song ends. The Egyptians had a word for that kind of existence. Akh, the transfigured spirit, luminous, free of identity. Modern Egyptologists have dismissed it as metaphor, a symbol of Ra's daily journey from innocence to wrath. Yet others whisper that it was real, a sacred device, hidden after the fall of Akhenaten, when Egypt's gods turned their faces away. It is said the Akh could move between worlds, shining without sound. Maybe that is what she became, the nameless light that flickers in her own tomb when the moon passes overhead. If you ever visit the Valley of the Queens and find the path that leads to the lesser tombs, you might feel it. A faint coolness where the wind pauses, a hush deeper than the rest. You may not see her, nor hear her, but you will know. The unnamed queen still dreams there, beneath a ceiling of silent stars. Her name may be gone, but her peace remains. And perhaps that is her message to the living, that there is beauty not only in what endures, but also in what chooses to fade. At the far edge of the desert, where sand meets horizon and silence becomes sound, stands a single column of stone. It rises from the dunes like a frozen flame, tall, slender, almost translucent beneath the moon. Somewhere between myth and metallurgy lies the truth. It has no name, no inscription, no known origin. And yet, when the wind moves across its face, it whispers. They call it El Samit, the silent one that speaks. No one knows who carved it or when. It is not marked by hieroglyphs, not adorned with gods or kings. Its granite is pale red, flecked with quartz, unlike the darker Aswan stone used for most ancient monuments. Bedouins who wander near avoid camping close. They say it hums after sunset, repeating sounds that are not the wind. Some claim it calls your name if you stand too long. The earliest record comes from 1847, when a British explorer named Charles Penton journeyed through the western desert searching for lost trade routes. In his journal, now housed at the British Library, he wrote, "We came upon a solitary needle of stone, half buried in the sand. It stood at least 50 feet high, smooth as glass. My guides refused to approach it after dusk, claiming it was the tongue of a sleeping god. That night, he awoke to what he described as a murmur like many voices carried in the wind, low, rhythmic, chanting. When he went outside, the desert was still, but the sound continued, emanating from the obelisk itself. A resonance that seemed to move through the air rather than across it. He left the next morning, shaken, and never returned." For decades, the obelisk vanished from memory. Maps of the region changed, dunes moved, routes shifted. Then, in 1981, a team of Egyptian surveyors photographing desert landmarks rediscovered it. Still standing, nearly buried to its midpoint. The granite showed no erosion, though the surface glowed faintly at dawn, as if polished by invisible hands. When measured, its proportions were precise, a perfect ratio of 1:9, identical to the mathematical rules governing temple obelisks of Heliopolis and Karnak. But unlike them, this one bore no dedication to the sun god Ra, no cartouche, no hieroglyphs. Only a faint spiral etched near its base, barely visible under certain light, a symbol identical to the ankh within a circle found on the door beneath the sand. Coincidence, perhaps, or continuity, a signature passed from civilization to civilization, beyond kings, beyond names. To study it properly, archaeologists from Cairo University erected a small camp nearby. They tested the granite composition, identical to Aswan stone. The mystery deepened. The nearest quarry was hundreds of kilometers away. Transporting such a monolith across pure desert would have been nearly impossible without an organized kingdom behind it. And yet, there it stood, aligned perfectly with the setting sun of the winter solstice. When dusk fell, strange things began. Sensitive microphones recorded low-frequency vibrations emanating from within the stone itself. A hum too deep for the human ear, but measurable, consistent, and responsive to wind direction. Each gust produced a different tone, forming subtle harmonics that shifted with the night air. When researchers amplified the sound, it resembled a voice speaking through layers of echo, vowels without words, rhythm without language. One of the audio technicians whispered, "It's as if the stone is remembering speech." In 1892, a small expedition led by French archaeologist Émile Leroux uncovered the remains of a solar sanctuary near Madaria, the ancient heart of Heliopolis. They expected the usual obelisks, shattered altars, fragments of offering tables. But beneath a layer of scorched limestone, they found something unexpected. A circular indentation carved into the floor, precisely 6 cubits across, lined with a fine groove for a metal frame. Ancient Egyptians believed obelisks were frozen rays of the sun, pillars through which divine light flowed into the world. They called them tekenu, meaning to pierce the sky. At dawn, they caught the first sunlight. At dusk, they returned it to heaven. Inscriptions on known obelisks describe them as speaking to the gods, not through words, but through resonance. Perhaps the whispering obelisk is an echo of that lost theology, a monument not to sight but to sound. Acoustic archaeologists later confirmed that the structure functions as a natural resonator. Its inner crystal structure amplifies frequencies between 30 and 60 Hz, the same range as the Earth's natural electromagnetic vibration, what scientists call the Schumann resonance. In other words, the stone hums with the pulse of the planet. But what makes it whisper? Some theorize that subtle imperfections inside the granite cause air pockets to vibrate, producing modulated tones when struck by wind. Others suggest piezoelectric effects, quartz under pressure generating faint electrical charge, which can translate to sound under the right conditions. And yet, the Bedouins say none of that matters. They believe the obelisk speaks the names of those who forget themselves. In 2007, a filmmaker named Rafik Mansour visited the site with a small crew to record the phenomenon. The footage, later archived by National Geographic, shows the obelisk at twilight, shadows long, air still. As the temperature drops, a low, melodic vibration fills the microphone. Then, faintly, a pattern emerges, 3 notes repeating, like a chant. Ah, ah, ah. Mansour stands close, whispering to his sound engineer, "It's breathing." Around it, they found inscriptions so faint they had to trace them by touch. "He who looks upon the light without veil shall remember what came before time." Later, in voiceover, he says, "I had the strange sensation that it was not the stone making sound, but the air inside me answering it." In nearby Siwa Oasis, there is an old folktale about a pillar that spoke to Alexander. The story claims that before founding the city that bears his name, Alexander the Great sought divine guidance in the desert oracle of Ammonius. On his journey, a stone whispered his destiny to him in the night wind. Scholars dismiss it as legend, yet the location in the story aligns eerily close to where the whispering obelisk stands. Perhaps this was that same oracle, not a temple, but a single monolith that translated the wind into meaning. Archaeologists have since mapped magnetic anomalies beneath the structure, traces of an underground chamber or foundation. But no excavation has been permitted. The desert there is unstable, and the stone seems to rest at the intersection of ancient bedrock fissures. Engineers worry that even minor digging could cause collapse. So the obelisk remains untouched, alone, patient, whispering to no one and everyone. Those who visit at night often describe the same experience, a feeling of lightness, as though the air vibrates within their chest. Some claim to hear words, others only tones. One visitor wrote, "I heard my own name, spoken not aloud but inside the bones of my head. It was neither frightening nor comforting, only true." At first, they thought it referred to Ra's daily rebirth. But one of Leroux's assistants, a young epigrapher named Amira al-Khatib, noticed something else. The alignment of the circle matched not the sun's path at noon, but the moment just after sunrise, when the first beam crossed the temple's threshold. A perfect calibration, as if meant to capture dawn itself and perhaps to hold it. Psychologists might call it suggestion, but in a land where stone has memory, perhaps truth requires no sound. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, creation began with vibration, the god Thoth speaking the first name into the void, dividing silence from existence. Every temple, every chant was built to echo that original sound. The whispering obelisk may be the last survivor of that idea, a monument to resonance itself, a reminder that speech, music, and prayer are all children of the same ancient breath. To stand before it at sunset is to feel that breath again. The dunes fall quiet, the wind slows, and the world seems to lean closer, listening. The sky turns copper, then indigo. The air thickens, then a murmur, a low vibration, steady as heartbeat, not loud but vast. The sound fills the space between thought and silence, between the world outside and the one within. And if you close your eyes, you realize it is not speaking to you. It is speaking through you. At dawn, the whisper stops. The desert holds its breath. The obelisk catches the first light, its edges glowing pink, then gold. For a brief moment, it appears transparent, as though it's made of nothing but sound made solid. The hum fades completely. The air stills. Only the shadow remains, long and precise, pointing toward the eastern horizon. The Bedouins say that when the obelisk falls silent, it is listening to the prayers of those who sleep nearby. They tell travelers to speak kindly in its presence, for every word becomes part of its song. No one knows how long it will stand. Wind will wear even the hardest granite. But for now it remains, a single memory of creation, half buried, half awake. Scientists measure, mystics listen, the desert breathes. And when night returns, so does the voice. Sometimes faint, sometimes clear, always ancient. A melody that feels familiar even when unheard. Because perhaps the obelisk is not remembering us at all. Perhaps it is reminding the earth of its own sound. If you stand there long enough, as stars emerge one by one, you might hear it too. A tremor beneath your ribs, a hum in your pulse, a sound that belongs neither to wind nor to stone. It is the whisper that begins every dawn, the echo that outlives every name, the voice that teaches even silence to sing. It is said that the mirror was no mere ornament. Ancient hymns to Ra speak of the shining face that judged the hearts of the kings. In ritual texts, the high priest of Heliopolis, the Uar or Keeper of Light, was required to stand before it during the Feast of Renewal and speak his true name. If the mirror accepted him, it glowed softly, like fire seen through tears. If not, it turned dark, a warning that even light has its secrets. And in that sound, the desert, like time itself, keeps breathing. Beneath the desert sun, the Great Pyramid of Khufu stands in perfect silence. Its edges, worn but patient, still cut the sky with impossible precision. Tourists circle its base by day, their voices carried off by wind. But at night, When the crowds vanish and the horizon turns to silver, the pyramid becomes something else. Not a monument, but a mountain of breath. It is said that deep beneath its lowest stones, hidden beyond the chambers known and unknown, there lies a space that was never meant to be found. The ancients called it Perhitepsesh, the house of stillness, though in later whispers it became something softer, the garden beneath the pyramid. The legend begins with a single line in an ancient document, the Papyrus of Nebra, a damaged text kept in the Cairo Museum. Between hymns to the sun god Ra, it mentions a green chamber where the gods planted silence. For centuries, scholars assumed it was metaphor, a poetic image of rebirth. Yet in 1954, when engineers discovered the buried solar boat beside the Great Pyramid, they uncovered something else, a shaft leading farther down, sealed by granite blocks. The shaft was quickly reburied after inspection, labeled structural void. But one engineer, Mahmoud Saleh, kept a private note. There is air below, cool and scented, not like tomb air. It smells of earth. Half a century later, in 2002, a robotic camera sent through one of the Queen's chamber shafts revealed a door with copper handles and a space beyond it. Still sealed, untouched. The discovery ignited speculation. More chambers, perhaps another room, perhaps nothing. But the instruments also detected something stranger, traces of moisture in the rock. Beneath the driest place on Earth there was water. Scientists called it condensation. Legends claim that when the mirror of Ra was uncovered to mortal sight, it showed not what is, but what was meant to be, glimpses of the Zep-Tepi the first time. Pharaohs came to it not for vanity, but for memory. Yet the mirror grew dangerous in an age when gods fell silent. The last to use it was Akhenaten, the heretic king who worshipped not Ra but Aten, the visible disk of the sun itself. Some say the mirror showed him too much, and he built his new city, Akhenaten, to chase the light he could never touch again. Mystics called it proof of the garden. The garden beneath the pyramid has lived in Egyptian oral tradition for centuries. The story says that when the first kings built their tombs to ascend to heaven, the architects of Khufu did something different. They built downward. While the outer pyramid reached toward the sun, its mirror image, invisible secret, reached into the earth. It was not made of gold or stone, but of soil. A chamber lined with granite and filled with plants, lotus, papyrus, and date palms, kept alive by an underground spring. The roots of life sleeping beneath the roots of stone. The priests called it Sekatank, the field of life. There they performed nightly rites, silent meditations beside still water, believing that by descending into earth they could mirror the sun's journey through the underworld and renew its rising each dawn. And so, beneath the pyramid that embodies eternity, they built a garden of impermanence, a reminder that even the gods need to breathe. In 1986, a Japanese archaeological mission studying ground anomalies near the Giza Plateau recorded low-density areas beneath the pyramid's southeast corner, hollow spaces, one shaped like a crescent. Their findings were inconclusive, but one note in the report stands out. Acoustic readings indicate echo dampening consistent with organic surfaces, not solid rock. That detail, easily overlooked, fascinated those who knew the legend, because only living matter, roots, fiber, water, could soften echoes in such a way. After his fall, the priests of Ammonius returned to power. They sealed the temples of the Aten and, it is whispered, hid the mirror deep beneath the sands. too sacred to destroy, too perilous to reveal. In time, its legend faded into myth, surviving only as a symbol of truth that burns. Years later, Egyptian geologist Dr. Nabil Sari reinterpreted these findings, proposing that natural caverns beneath the pyramid may have been deliberately integrated into its foundation. He called them breathing chambers, designed to stabilize humidity and temperature. Yet he admitted privately that their geometry was too perfect. A human hand was present. Perhaps the ancients built nature itself into their architecture. Imagine it. A hidden chamber deep beneath the weight of millions of stones. A single pool of still water at its heart, fed by a vein from the old Nile. Around it, the roots of papyrus sleeping in darkness. The ceiling painted not with stars, but with green pigment. Fragments of malachite crushed and spread across plaster to mimic the shimmer of leaves. Here, the priests of Khufu would come not to speak, but to unlearn speech. To listen to the slow heartbeat of the earth. To remember that eternity grows, not just endures. Perhaps they came barefoot, carrying small lamps filled with oil and myrrh. The flames would bend against the reflection of water, scattering light across the walls like rippling vines. The air would be thick, sweet, and humid, a contrast to the desert above. And in that quiet, they would recite one simple prayer preserved in a single fragment of the pyramid texts. May the God who made green the world remember my breath. Modern Egyptologists dismiss the garden as myth, an allegory for spiritual balance. Yet even myth can leave footprints. In 2017, cosmic ray scanning of the Great Pyramid revealed a massive void above the Grand Gallery, a chamber larger than any yet discovered. The researchers called it the Big Void. But below the pyramid, smaller anomalies remain unexplained, subtle, crescent-shaped spaces that resist classification. Some call them cavities, others reservoirs. What if one of them still holds the traces of that ancient garden? Its air trapped, its water stilled, its seeds fossilized into silence. One soil sample taken from near the pyramid's base contained microscopic pollen grains, older than expected, belonging to plants not native to the surrounding plateau but to wetter lands nearer the Nile. It was likely carried by wind, perhaps by insects, yet it gives the legend a breath of possibility. Local guards who patrol the plateau at night tell their own stories. They say that sometimes, when the temperature drops and the sand cools, a faint scent rises from the pyramid's eastern side, something like damp soil or flowering papyrus. Comes suddenly, then fades. Dogs smell it first, lifting their heads. Then the air shifts, heavy but fragrant, before returning to dust. One guard described it softly. It is as if the pyramid exhales the memory of spring. The ancient Egyptians believed paradise was not in the sky, but in a field, a green expanse called Sekitaru, the field of reeds. It was the afterlife of balance and harvest, where the soul reaped the fruits of its deeds. To reach it, the spirit crossed through 12 gates of night, following the sun's path beneath the world. Perhaps the garden beneath the pyramid was a reflection of that belief, a fragment of the afterlife built in stone, a rehearsal for eternity. Dr. Leroux and his team never found the mirror itself. They excavated the foundation, catalogued the circle, and shipped fragments to the Louvre. But Amira al-Khatib stayed behind. She wrote in her letters that something about the site felt alive, that at dawn, the sand within the circular pit shimmered faintly, though no metal remained. Locals refused to enter after nightfall. They said the ground caught fire without flame. When the kings built upward, they sought to reach the heavens. When the priests built downward, they sought to touch the source. In 2020, a group of engineers using seismic imaging detected faint vibrations deep beneath the pyramid's bedrock, rhythmic oscillations unlike any known mechanical interference. The readings suggested slow, natural pulses occurring every few minutes. Dr. Sari, who reviewed the data, wrote simply, "The pyramid breathes." Whether those pulses come from shifting groundwater, geothermal expansion, or something else entirely, no one can say. But the idea that the pyramid is alive, that beneath its stones a hidden rhythm endures, fits perfectly with the myth. The ancients may have built not only a monument, but a living machine, a mountain that imitates the breath of the earth itself. If you were to stand at its base tonight, as the stars crown its apex, you might feel it too. A faint coolness rising from below, like the sigh of buried water. The air hums with quiet. The sand shivers with unseen motion. Beneath your feet, somewhere between geology and dream, the oldest garden in the world sleeps. Not dead, but patient. Perhaps it still holds the scent of lotus, the reflection of lamplight, the breath of priests who once prayed for balance between life and eternity. In one final note, dated April 12, 1893, she wrote, "Perhaps it is the pyramid's heart." And maybe that is Egypt's greatest secret. Not gold, not kings, not conquest, but a garden hidden under stone. A promise that even in the weight of death, life continues to bloom quietly, unseen. The pyramid above teaches endurance. The garden below teaches renewal. Together they form the breath of the world. Inhale and exhale, stone and soil, silence and seed. And so the Great Pyramid, even in its stillness, continues to grow. It begins with footsteps you cannot hear. A low hill of sand that never keeps the same shape twice. A line of stars arcing over the western sky, steady as breath. And at the hill's shoulder, where the wind curls like a whispered prayer, there is a man sitting with his back to the night. He holds no weapon, only a staff of tamarisk polished by years of patient hands. His robe is the color of dust and moonlight. If you pass within a dozen paces, you will not see him at first. He is the kind of stillness that belongs to the land. They call him the Keeper, a name older than names. The light beneath the sand pulses like breath. It is not reflection, it is memory. He watches a door no one is allowed to open. It is said that the door lies flat beneath the sand, carved into bedrock like a memory kept close to the earth. Long before the first pyramid rose, before Memphis sent its priests to count the stars, there stood here a small sanctuary without walls. At dusk, a lamp was set upon a stone, and the flame was fed with oil of blue lotus. The lamp was not for sight, but for promise. Those who kept it were not warriors, but listeners. Ancient Egypt knew such keepers. Temple doorkeepers appear in the oldest texts, quiet officials who guarded thresholds with ritual rather than force. The pyramid texts whisper of he who opens the way and he who knows the names. For in that world, a gate yielded not to strength but to remembrance. Later, in the Book of the Dead, the traveler meets the keepers of the gates, each with a secret name, each asking for a word that is not spoken but recognized. And in the desert beyond Thebes, the Medjay, those tireless Nubian watchmen, kept the borders like moving horizons, guardians of silence as much as safety. Our keeper belongs to that lineage of thresholds. But the door he watches is older than any temple door, older even than the idea of kings. No inscription marks it, only a sign you cannot carry in your hands. A spiral encircling the ankh, cut so shallow that even lamplight barely finds it. We have seen that sign before, on a stone beneath the dunes that felt like a living pulse, on the base of an obelisk that hummed at dusk, in a circle at Heliopolis meant to cradle the first light of morning. A mark passed through ages like a shared breath. Some believe this door is the source of that breath, the place where remembering and forgetting touch. Others say it is a mercy, the stone lid placed over something the ancients loved but dared not wake. The elders in nearby villages refuse to point to the hill. They will turn their palms upward and say, "There is no door." Then they will fall quiet, as if the word itself might lift sand. But on winter nights, when Orion stands clear and the air tastes of flint, the keeper lights a small lamp and the wind lowers its voice. He does not speak a prayer you can hear. He listens for one. Then her letters stopped. A traveler once met him at dawn, after losing her way among shifting dunes. She wrote that his face held the look of those who live by horizons, weathered into kindness, calm as deep water. He offered her dates and water, and when she asked what he waited for in such emptiness, he answered without turning his head, "For the sand to forget me, then I will know my work is finished." She asked what door lay here. He traced a half circle in the air and said, "The one that remembers." When she pressed him what it remembers who once opened it, he smiled and let the questions pass like birds. "Some doors open," he said softly. "Others listen. This is a listening door." There are stories about the first keeper. They say he was a priest of no god, a guardian taught by elders who had no names. His model was not a soldier, but the jackal, Anubis in the old language, who watches the path of the dead without judgment or complaint. In early dynastic years, when stone was still learning how to be monument, a small circle of guardians tended this place. They carried staffs, lamps, and a ledger of silence. When a king died, they walked out here at night and stood until dawn. When a city fell, they stood. When the Nile rose too high and then too little, they stood. Their work did not change with empires. One scroll from a distant monastery tells of a vow. "We, keepers of the threshold, shall be named only by the desert." It is ensigned. The parchment smells faintly even now of old oil. We do not know what lies below. That is the point. But the desert keeps a kind of ledger that scholars can still read. Bed forms and shivers, the way sand slumps differently over stone than over earth. Somewhere beneath this hill, ground echo surveys taken by a cautious team in the 1980s recorded a neat geometry at shallow depth. A rectangle surrounded by ringed voids, like chambers encircling a hearth. The notes were quietly filed away, stamped with a minister's thin blue ink. No excavation, cultural sensitivity. The team left. The keeper remained. Sometimes it helps to remember what Egypt built for its doors. Temple thresholds were not mere entrances. They were instruments, lintels carved to catch first light at solstice, Floors inlaid with hematite to mirror a walking shadow. Door guardians painted not to frighten the living, but to remind them. Do you know your name? Do you know your heart? To pass a gate was to be weighed, not by judgment, but by balance. What if this door beneath the sand is the first of those, the doorway that taught all other doorways what to do? The keeper knows the old names, not of kings, but of winds. He can tell you when the Khamsin will arrive by studying the color of morning. He can read the night by the silence of insects. He marks the year not by dates but by the height of Orion's shoulder above the horizon when the cold first bites. He would never say these things if you asked. He will simply raise his lamp and listen. He is not alone in history. In the ruins of Heliopolis, inscriptions record a title, "He who lifts the latch of dawn." At Karnak, lists of doorkeepers name men and women responsible for opening the way for the god. Ritual timekeeping turned into sacred duty. In the Book of Gates, the traveler must greet each gatekeeper by secret name to pass the hours of night. Tuthmosis, Nefertari, common scribe, all would have learned at least a little of this. Thresholds do not yield to haste. Our keeper understands the same law. He does not open. He watches the world become worthy of opening. We who live in noise want the door to be a surprise, or a revelation, or a catastrophe, but the desert teaches by subtraction. Each day the hill loses one curve and gains another. Each evening the stars arrive on time without hurry. In such company, shock has no place, only rhythm. It is said the keeper has a book, a thin codex wrapped in goat leather, edges dulled by grit. In it, a single hand has written the same 3 lines for generations. A century later, in 2004, a team of Egyptian archaeologists from Ain Shams University returned to the same area using ground-penetrating radar. Beneath the modern streets of Mataria, they detected a void, a dome-shaped chamber roughly 12 meters below the surface, directly aligned with the ancient sanctuary. Yet every attempt to drill toward it was blocked by inexplicable interference. Machinery failing, sensors glitching, data erased. The wind moved east today. The sand covered the mark. The mark remained. No dates. No names. Only a long obedience stretched across centuries. There is a little factual ladder here for the mind to hold while the heart listens. Egypt's earliest police were the Medjay, desert-born guardians who patrolled the frontiers and later the royal cemeteries. They appear on Middle and New Kingdom reliefs, quiet figures standing at the edges where order meets wildness. Temple registers list doorkeepers alongside priests and singers. Some rites required the opening of doors at precise breaths of dawn, the way a harpist strikes a string when the air is perfectly still. And funerary papyri, the fragile maps for the soul, are crowded with gatekeepers whose secret names must be remembered in the dark. To forget them is to wander. To remember is to pass. Place these truths like stones around our hill. They will not prove the door, but they will teach us its grammar. The keeper speaks rarely. When he does, his words are simple, shaped by a life of listening. Once a boy from the nearby village, bold with youth, came at noon to dare him. "If you guard a door," the boy said, laughing, "then open it and show me." Professor Nadia Hassan, who led the survey, later wrote, "It was as though the earth itself refused to be opened." The data logs from the project show something stranger. Each time they scanned near sunrise, the instruments recorded a brief flare of electromagnetic resonance, a pulse lasting exactly 142 seconds, synchronized with the moment the sun crossed the horizon. The keeper pointed to the vast sky, white with heat. "It is open," he said. The boy frowned. "I mean the door beneath." The keeper's eyes softened. "When you can hear the sky, you will hear what the earth is saying. Until then, your ears are full." Years later the boy, now a man with lines around his eyes, returned at dusk and sat beside him. The keeper passed him the small lamp. Together they watched the sand breathe. No one asked again. Sometimes, in late summer, a vibration rises through the hill. Not sound, exactly, but a feeling in the ribs, the way a far drum is felt before it is heard. The keeper will place both hands on the ground and close his eyes. A hint of lotus floats up from nowhere. The sand cools. Even the jackals keep their distance. After a few minutes, the vibration fades, and all that remains is an ordinary wind moving toward the Nile. Science would like measurements. The desert offers metaphors. It is enough. It was, in a way, the breath of light. A scholar once came with papers and stamps and a tired impatience. He had traveled far, bringing a grant and a drone and a heart that loved truth in the way a thirsty man loves an empty well. He explained scanners, permits, plans. He pointed to the hill with the flat hand of command. "We will be gentle," he said. The keeper listened to every sentence as if it were a prayer. When the man finished, the keeper smiled and poured him tea from a blackened kettle. "It is good," he said, "to bring gentle things to a listening place." They sat until the scholar's shoulders dropped. The drone did not fly that day. The wind was wrong, he said. He stayed a week, learned the colors of the morning, and left with a thinner plan but a fuller face. His report spoke of environmental sensitivities and community stewardship. His private notebook contained only 3 words: "Not yet open." What waits beneath? A chamber like a held breath. A slab that hums when the wind shifts. Perhaps nothing at all, only the discipline of leaving a mystery hole. There are older hints, if we like to gather them. The house of stillness beneath the pyramid where roots may once have slept. The breathless chamber with alabaster jars arranged like a spiral of lungs. The mirror of dawn that turned light into memory. The temple in the river that chose sleep over worship. All these places taught one lesson with many voices. Do not mistake opening for awakening. Some things wake without breaking a seal. Some doors open inward, so far inward that the outside world never sees the hinge. The keeper is not immortal. He learned the hill from an old woman who watched it before him, who in turn learned it from a man who came limping out of the western oases with salt on his sleeves and stars in his eyes. When the keeper sleeps, another sits. When he falls sick, a girl from the village, thin, fierce, carrying water like a crown, takes his place. Guarding is a verb, not a throne. It is a relay of listening. On the night he knows his watch will end, the keeper will walk the ridge once, slowly, with his lamp covered by the hem of his robe. He will touch the sand with the back of his hand. He will lean his ear to the ground and hear the answer he has waited all his life to hear. Not yes, not no, but that deep, benevolent silence that means continue. Then he will place the staff in younger hands and sleep like stone. And you, listener, if one night your road bends beside this hill and the horizon hums with the soft electricity of stars, you may feel the urge to ask for an opening. The human heart longs for veils to lift, for hidden things to become plain. You may stand there and think of all the doors that have admitted you. Houses and hospitals, courts and classrooms, thresholds you crossed without noticing the small miracles of hinges and handholds. Here, let that longing become gentler. Let it become a question without a question mark. It is said that standing near the keeper makes your breathing slow of its own accord. Your eyes adjust to a darkness that is not empty, but generous. You hear your pulse migrating outward, joining the steady patience of the land. The lamp is a single star in a small sky of sand. The staff leans against the dome of night like a second horizon. And in that precise, merciful balance between seeing and not seeing, a thought arrives without words. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to be kept. Perhaps the mirror was never meant to be found as an object. When the hour grows thin and the cold begins to nibble the bones, you will notice what the keeper has been hearing all along. The hill exhaling, the door breathing, the wind saying nothing in a language older than speech. The lamp will gutter once and catch again. The star of Orion's shoulder will slide a finger's width toward the earth. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The keeper says at last, almost to himself. He covers the lamp with his palm. The dark deepens kindly. The door does not open. The world does. And in that opening, not of stone but of attention, the night lays its cool hand upon your brow, and the sand remembers your weight, and sleep arrives like a priest with no name, carrying a blessing made of breath. The keeper returns to his listening. The hill keeps its gentle vow. The hidden door, loved more for its silence than any secret beyond it, rests beneath the shifting dunes, closed, remembered, and mercifully still. Perhaps it was only the idea of seeing without eyes, of truth reflected not in metal, but in memory itself. Ancient Egyptian theology often blurred the line between matter and spirit. To them, a symbol was not representation but manifestation. When they carved the sun on temple walls, they believed that the image was Ra, not metaphorically but truly. So when they spoke of a mirror that reflected souls, maybe it was not an artifact at all but a doorway, a place where perception bent back upon itself. Modern physicists might call it impossible, but in Egypt, impossibility is just another name for silence. As night falls over the ruins of Heliopolis, the modern city hums nearby, traffic, lights, the faint vibration of living time. Yet beneath that noise, something older breathes. The obelisk of Senusret still stands, the last survivor of the Sun Temple. At certain angles, its granite face catches the moonlight, casting reflections that move like ripples across the sand. Some say those ripples gather briefly in a perfect circle, and vanish again when the dawn begins. Local children call it Ein El-Nur, the Eye of Light. Elders say it is better not to watch. It is strange, isn't it, how light, the gentlest of things, can become unbearable when too pure. The priests of Heliopolis taught that truth is a radiance meant to be veiled, for unfiltered knowledge consumes the soul like the midday sun. They covered their sacred discs with linen during ceremony, lowering their gaze as they chanted the name of Ra. Only when dawn returned did they dare unveil it, a brief communion between the human and the divine. That ritual, some believe, still happens unseen. Every morning, as the first ray touches the sand, it is said that something beneath the city answers with its own faint shimmer, a heartbeat, a remembering, a mirror that has never stopped reflecting. And perhaps that is why Heliopolis was called on by the ancients, the city of the sun, yes, but also the city of witness. If you walk there now, past the quiet ruins and the palm shadows, and stand where the morning light first falls, you might feel it. A soft warmth rising from below, as if the earth itself were exhaling light. You close your eyes, and the world seems to turn inward. A silence so vast it feels alive. For a moment, you are neither observer nor observed. You are reflection itself, unbound, golden, endless. Maybe that was what the priests of Ra sought all along. Not to see the gods, but to be seen by them. To stand within the mirror of the sun, and remember. Because in the end, truth is not what we find. It is what remains when everything else fades. And some reflections, once seen, can never be unremembered. So tonight, as you drift into that quiet light between waking and sleep, imagine it. The mirror waiting beneath the sand. The dawn brushing across its ancient face. The breath of Ra still glimmering through time. It is not a story. It is a reflection waiting for your eyes to close. Night falls slowly along the Nile. The water darkens from bronze to ink, its surface folding the stars like an ancient mirror. On the western bank near Esna, fishermen still tell a story, that beneath the river's heart lies a temple built not for the gods above, but for those who sleep below. When the current slows and the moon is high, they say the water trembles without wind, as though something beneath it breathes. It is called Perna in Old Coptic, the house of the deep rest. A place that once stood on land, before the river changed its course and claimed it whole. The first written mention of the drowned temple appears in a papyrus dated to the late Ptolemaic period, preserved in fragments in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. It describes a sanctuary dedicated to Sobek-Ra, the crocodile god of fertility and the underworld waters. The text is simple, but haunting. When the flood returned, so too did the temple sink, for the god desired silence more than worship. Historians once dismissed it as metaphor, the symbolic submersion of an era when Hellenistic rulers absorbed the old gods into their own pantheon. But in 1964, when the Aswan High Dam was nearing completion, a team of underwater archaeologists led by Professor Abdul Rahman Taher found the remains of columns and reliefs in a submerged basin northwest of Esna. They were unlike any others. Sandstone pillars inscribed not with pharaohs or prayers, but with ripples, waves carved in hieroglyphic rhythm, as if the stone itself remembered movement. The divers called it the Sleeping Temple. It is said the air beneath the river tastes of copper and stillness.